At 2:47 a.m., my premature daughter's heart monitor screamed. Someone had cut her incubator's power. As I breathed life into her dying lungs, I saw our HOA president smiling with satisfaction the next morning. She had no idea she'd just tried to murder a federal judge's baby. Fatal mistake. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The alarm screamed through our house at 2:47 a.m. Not the smoke detector. Not the security system. The heart monitor connected to my 3-month-old daughter Emma's incubator. The sound that meant her tiny heart had stopped beating. I ran to the nursery, my bare feet slipping on the hardwood floor. Emma lay motionless in her clear plastic sanctuary, her skin blue-gray in the dim light. The incubator that had kept her alive for 3 months was dark. Dead. No power. No, 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 I whispered, scooping her impossibly small body into my hands. She weighed barely 4 pounds, born at 26 weeks when my pregnancy went wrong. Her lungs were underdeveloped. Her heart was weak. Without the incubator's controlled environment, she couldn't survive. I pressed my mouth to hers, breathing life into lungs the size of walnuts. 1 breath. 2 breaths. Her chest rose and fell with my efforts, but she wasn't breathing on her own. My hands shook as I called 911. My baby's not breathing, I gasped into the phone. Her incubator lost power. She's premature. She needs help now. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. Ambulance is on the way. Keep doing rescue breathing. Don't stop. I breathed for Emma while running through the house, checking every outlet, every breaker. Nothing else had lost power. Just the nursery. Just the one room that kept my daughter alive. The paramedics burst through my front door 7 minutes later. 7 minutes of me breathing for my child, willing her to live with every fiber of my being. They took over with professional equipment, working over her tiny body as they loaded her into the ambulance. Is she going to be okay? I asked, climbing in beside them. The paramedic, a kind woman with gentle hands, looked at me with practiced compassion. We're doing everything we can. How long was she without the incubator? Maybe 10 minutes. The power just went out in her room. 10 minutes is a long time for a baby this fragile. At the hospital, they rushed Emma into the NICU. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, connecting wires and tubes, pumping medications into her impossibly small veins. I stood outside the glass wall watching my daughter fight for her life. Dr. Martinez, Emma's neonatologist, found me in the waiting room 3 hours later. His face was serious but not hopeless. She's stable for now. We've got her on a ventilator and she's responding to treatment. But Rebecca, this was very close. Another few minutes and we would have lost her. Will there be permanent damage? He hesitated. Her brain was without oxygen for several minutes. We won't know the extent of any damage for weeks or months. But she's alive. That's what matters right now. I called my husband James from the hospital parking lot. He was deployed overseas with the army, fighting in Afghanistan while I fought this battle at home. When I heard his voice, I broke down completely. Emma almost died tonight, I sobbed. The power went out in her room and her incubator stopped working. James, I thought I lost her. What do you mean the power went out? In just her room? I don't know what happened. Everything else in the house was fine. Just the nursery lost power. That doesn't make sense, Becca. You need to have an electrician check it out. But I already knew it wasn't an electrical problem. 3 months of living in Willow Creek Estates had taught me exactly who controlled every aspect of our neighborhood, and who had made our lives miserable since the day we moved in. Karen Mullins was the HOA president, a position she had held for 8 years and wielded like a weapon. She was 62 years old, with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. She ruled our gated community with an iron fist, issuing fines for grass that was too long, mailboxes that were the wrong color, and cars parked in driveways instead of garages. But Karen's hatred for our family went beyond her usual petty tyranny. It was personal. We had moved to Willow Creek when I was 6 months pregnant, looking for a safe, quiet neighborhood to raise our children. James was about to deploy and I wanted to be somewhere secure while he was gone. The HOA fees were expensive, but the community was supposed to be family-friendly. Karen had opposed our application from the beginning. At the HOA meeting where they voted on our membership, she had asked pointed questions about James's military salary, my job as a federal judge, and our commitment to community standards. Other board members later told me she had argued that military families were transient and wouldn't maintain property values. When Emma was born prematurely and we installed medical equipment in our home, Karen found new reasons to harass us. She complained that the ambulance visits were disturbing the peace. She said the medical supply deliveries violated regulations about commercial vehicles. She even tried to fine us for the oxygen tanks visible through our front window, claiming they were unsightly. But this morning was different. This wasn't a fine or a complaint. Someone had deliberately cut the power to Emma's room. Someone had tried to kill my baby. I drove home from the hospital as the sun was rising, my eyes burning from exhaustion and tears. That's when I saw Karen standing in her front yard, watering her perfect roses. She was fully dressed at 6 a.m., wearing a crisp white blouse and navy slacks. Her hair was styled. Her makeup was perfect. She looked at me and smiled. Not a sympathetic smile. Not a concerned neighbor asking about the ambulance that had screamed out of our driveway hours earlier. A satisfied smile. A smile that said she knew exactly what had happened and was pleased with the results. I parked in my driveway and walked across the street. Karen continued watering her roses, humming softly to herself. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" she said without looking at me. "My daughter almost died last night." "Oh my, how terrible." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "These old houses, you never know when the electrical systems might fail." "The electrical system didn't fail, Karen. Someone cut the power to her room." She finally looked at me, her blue eyes cold and amused. "Now why would anyone do such a thing? That would be attempted murder." The word hung in the air between us. Murder. She had said it so casually, like discussing the weather. But I heard the threat underneath. The challenge. The certainty that she could never be caught or punished. "You're right," I said quietly. "It would be attempted murder. And when I find out who did it, they're going to federal prison for the rest of their life." Karen's smile faltered for just a moment. "Well, I hope you find whoever is responsible. Though I'm sure it was just an electrical problem. These things happen." I walked back to my house, my mind racing. Karen had all but confessed, but confession wasn't proof. I needed evidence. I needed to be smart about this. Because I wasn't just Rebecca Williams' worried mother. I was Judge Rebecca Williams of the United States District Court. And I knew exactly how to destroy someone who threatened my family. The electrician confirmed what I already knew. The power line to Emma's room had been deliberately severed. Someone had used wire cutters to slice through the cable that powered the outlet for her incubator. The cut was clean and precise, made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "This wasn't an accident," Mike the electrician told me. "Someone wanted to cut power to just this room. They knew what they were cutting." I called the police, but Officer Thompson who responded seemed more interested in protecting Karen than investigating a crime. He looked at the severed wire, took a few notes, and basically told me these things happen. "Could have been kids playing pranks," he said. "Or maybe a disgruntled contractor. Hard to prove intent." Intent? Someone cut the power to a dying baby's life support equipment. How is that not clear intent? "Well, ma'am, we'd need evidence of who did it." "And why?" "Without witnesses or fingerprints, it's just vandalism." Officer Thompson had lived in Willow Creek for 20 years. His daughter played tennis with Karen's niece. His wife worked with Karen on the community garden committee. He wasn't going to investigate Karen Mullins for anything. But I had resources the local police didn't have. I had federal connections. I had access to surveillance equipment. And I had something Karen had never dealt with before, someone who understood the law better than she did. I started with the security cameras. Our neighborhood had dozens of them, monitoring every entrance and common area. As a federal judge, I could request access to surveillance footage for criminal investigations. Within hours, I had video from every camera in Willow Creek. The footage from the night Emma almost died was illuminating. At 1:30 a.m., Karen's front door opened. A figure in dark clothing emerged, carrying a small bag. The figure walked purposefully toward our house, staying in the shadows but visible to the cameras. At 1:45 a.m., the same figure appeared near our electrical box. They worked for several minutes, then disappeared back into the shadows. At 2:15 a.m., Karen's front door closed again. The video quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. Karen had planned this attack carefully, timing it for the middle of the night when everyone would be asleep. She had worn dark clothes and moved carefully to avoid detection. But she hadn't counted on federal-grade surveillance analysis. I enhanced the footage using FBI software, isolating facial features and body measurements. The figure in the video matched Karen's height, weight, and distinctive walk. Her lawyer would argue it could have been anyone, but combined with other evidence, it was enough for a warrant. The real breakthrough came when I searched Karen's background. She wasn't just a retired housewife with too much time on her hands. She was a former electrical contractor who had run her own business for 30 years before retiring. She knew exactly how to cut power to a single room without affecting the rest of the house. More disturbing was what I found in her personal history. Karen had been investigated twice for harassment in previous neighborhoods. In Phoenix, she had systematically targeted a Hispanic family until they sold their house and moved away. In Denver, she had led a campaign to force out a gay couple, claiming their lifestyle violated community standards. Both times, she had escalated from complaints and fines to actual sabotage. In Phoenix, she had repeatedly called immigration services on the family, despite knowing they were U.S. citizens. In Denver, she had organized neighborhood watch groups that were really harassment squads. But she had never before tried to kill a baby. I spent the next week gathering evidence while Emma fought for her life in the NICU. The oxygen deprivation had caused brain swelling. She was on multiple medications to control seizures. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the next few weeks would determine if she suffered permanent damage. James got emergency leave and flew home to be with us. When he saw Emma surrounded by machines in the hospital, he broke down crying. This big, strong soldier who had survived combat in Afghanistan was devastated by the sight of his tiny daughter fighting for her life. "Who did this?" he asked me. "Karen Mullins. I have proof." His jaw tightened. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to destroy her. Legally. Completely. She tried to murder our daughter, and I'm going to make sure she pays for every second Emma spent without oxygen." The federal prosecutor I contacted was Margaret Chin, someone I had worked with for years. When I explained the situation, she was horrified and immediately agreed to take the case. "Attempted murder of a federal judge's child is a federal crime," she told me. "We can charge her under federal terrorism statutes if we can prove she targeted you because of your position." She did. I have recordings of HOA meetings where she specifically complained about having a federal judge in the neighborhood. She said judges think they're above community rules. Perfect. That's motive. Combined with your surveillance footage and her electrical background, we have a solid case. But building a legal case was only part of my plan. Karen had tried to kill Emma because she thought she could get away with it. She thought she was untouchable in her little kingdom of Willow Creek Estates. She had no idea what kind of enemy she had made. I used my judicial contacts to request a full FBI investigation of the Willow Creek HOA. Within days, agents were interviewing residents about Karen's pattern of harassment and discrimination. They discovered a systematic campaign of terror against families who didn't fit Karen's vision of the perfect community. The scope of the investigation expanded rapidly as more families came forward with their stories. Agent Sarah Martinez, who led the investigation, told me they had never seen such organized neighborhood harassment. Karen had built an entire network of surveillance and intimidation that operated like a domestic terrorism cell. The Martinez family had been fined repeatedly for excessive noise when their children played in their own backyard. Karen had installed a decibel meter near their property line and documented every instance when neighborhood children's laughter exceeded what she considered acceptable levels. She had called the police dozens of times, claiming the family was disturbing the peace. But the harassment went beyond noise complaints. Karen had researched the Martinez family's immigration status and spread rumors that they were undocumented, despite knowing they were American citizens. She had called immigration enforcement multiple times with false reports, forcing the family to endure terrifying visits from federal agents who disrupted their children's lives. The Johnsons, an elderly black couple, had been cited for inappropriate yard decorations when they displayed a small American flag. Karen had argued that patriotic displays were political statements that violated HOA guidelines about maintaining neutrality. When they refused to remove the flag, she escalated to property damage, repeatedly stealing their decorations and slashing their garden hoses. Mrs. Johnson, a 73-year-old retired teacher, broke down crying when she testified to federal investigators. "We served this country for 40 years, she said. "My husband was a Vietnam veteran. We never thought we'd be terrorized in our own neighborhood for displaying the flag he fought to defend." The Patel family had been threatened with foreclosure over cooking odors that allegedly violated nuisance regulations. Karen had claimed that the smell of Indian spices was a health hazard that decreased property values. She had organized a petition among neighbors, demanding that the family either stop cooking traditional food or move out of the neighborhood. When the Patels refused to change their cooking habits, Karen's harassment became vicious. She called the health department claiming they were operating an illegal restaurant. She called Child Protective Services with false reports of neglect and abuse. She even hired a private investigator to document their daily activities, looking for any violation she could use against them. Dr. Patel, a respected cardiologist at the local hospital, described the psychological toll of Karen's campaign. "We came to America for freedom and opportunity," he told investigators. "Instead, we found ourselves living in fear, constantly worried about what false accusation would come next. Our children were afraid to invite friends over because of the harassment." In every case, Karen had started with official complaints, escalated to harassment, and finally resorted to sabotage when families didn't move away voluntarily. She had poisoned the Martinez family's dog with antifreeze when they refused to move. She had slashed the Johnsons' tires multiple times when they wouldn't remove their flag. She had called Child Protective Services on the Patels with false reports of abuse when they continued cooking their traditional food. The investigation revealed that Karen had spent years building a network of like-minded neighbors who shared her vision of what the community should look like. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 streets over, had been Karen's primary lieutenant in these campaigns. She was a retired teacher who spent her days monitoring the neighborhood through binoculars, documenting violations and photographing visitors. Mrs. Henderson had kept detailed logs of every family's activities. She knew when people left for work, when children came home from school, who visited and how long they stayed. Her surveillance was so comprehensive that she could tell investigators what each targeted family had for dinner on any given night, based on the smells coming from their kitchens. Mr. Thompson, the retired police officer who had refused to investigate Emma's case, was also part of Karen's network. His law enforcement background had given weight to Karen's complaints and had helped her avoid scrutiny for years. He had filed false police reports, made perjured statements, and used his connections to protect Karen from consequences. But none of her previous victims had been federal judges with the power to fight back. And none of her previous attacks had crossed the line from harassment to attempted murder. The warrant for Karen's arrest was signed on a Thursday morning. I made sure to be there when FBI agents knocked on her door at 6 a.m. She answered in her bathrobe, her perfect hair in curlers, looking confused and vulnerable. "Karen Mullins, you're under arrest for attempted murder and federal terrorism charges." Agent Sarah Martinez read her rights while 2 other agents searched her house. Karen's eyes found me standing across the street. For the first time since I had known her, she looked afraid. "This is ridiculous," she called out. "I haven't done anything wrong." "You tried to kill my daughter," I said quietly. But my voice carried in the morning air. Neighbors were coming out of their houses, watching the drama unfold. "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen insisted as they put handcuffs on her. "This is harassment. I'm going to sue you for false arrest." "Good luck with that. I'm a federal judge. I know what evidence looks like." As they put Karen in the FBI car, I felt a moment of satisfaction. But it was tempered by the knowledge that Emma was still fighting for her life. Justice for Karen wouldn't heal my daughter's brain or give her back the oxygen she had lost. The search of Karen's house revealed evidence that shocked even experienced FBI agents. In her basement office, they found detailed files on every family in Willow Creek. She had documented their comings and goings, their visitors, their habits. She had photos taken through windows and detailed plans for forcing out undesirable residents. Most damning was a journal where she had written about each family she had targeted. The entries about our family were particularly vicious. "Federal judges think they're above the law. Rebecca Williams moved here thinking her title would protect her from community standards. Her soldier husband is never home. Their defective baby is a drain on emergency services. Time to show them they're not welcome here." The final entry, dated the night before Emma's incident, was chilling. "Emergency tonight. The baby's equipment draws too much power. Electrical problems happen in old houses. Sometimes parents learn hard lessons about where they don't belong." She had planned Emma's near death as a lesson. A warning. A way to force us out of the neighborhood by making it too dangerous for our medically fragile child to live there. The trial began 3 months later. Emma had survived her brain injury, but she would need therapy for years. She had developmental delays and hearing loss. The little girl who should have been babbling and rolling over was still struggling to focus her eyes and hold up her head. Karen hired an expensive defense team that tried to paint her as a concerned community leader who had been framed. They argued that the video evidence was inconclusive and that anyone could have cut the power line. But they couldn't explain away her journal entries. They couldn't dismiss her electrical expertise. They couldn't account for her history of harassment against families she wanted gone. The prosecution presented a timeline of Karen's campaign against our family. It started the day we moved in and escalated systematically. First, complaints about our moving truck blocking the street. Then fines for our lawn being too tall. Then harassment about Emma's medical equipment and supplies. Mrs. Martinez testified about finding her dog poisoned after Karen complained about barking. Mr. Johnson described having his tires slashed repeatedly after refusing to remove his flag. The Patel family told the jury about false reports to child services that had traumatized their children. She didn't just target the Williams family, Prosecutor Chin told the jury. She targeted anyone who didn't fit her vision of who belonged in Willow Creek. But when she tried to kill a baby to force a family out of their home, she crossed a line into terrorism. The defense's closing argument was desperate. Karen Mullins is a 62-year-old woman who dedicated her life to maintaining community standards. She made mistakes, yes. She was overzealous in her duties as HOA president. But she is not a terrorist. She is not a would-be child killer. She is a lonely widow who let power go to her head. I testified on the final day of trial. Sitting in the witness chair looking at the jury, I described finding Emma blue and lifeless in her crib. I talked about breathing for my daughter, willing her to live while knowing someone had deliberately tried to kill her. Karen Mullins didn't just cut a power line, I told the jury. She tried to murder my 3-month-old daughter because she didn't think our family belonged in her neighborhood. She calculated the timing to maximize trauma. She knew Emma would die without her life support equipment. She wanted us to find our baby dead as a message about what happens to families she considers undesirable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Karen stood to hear her fate. She had maintained her composure throughout the trial, but now her hands were shaking. Guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. Guilty of federal terrorism charges. Guilty of civil rights violations. Guilty of conspiracy to commit hate crimes. Karen collapsed into her chair as the verdicts were read. Her expensive lawyers immediately began talking about appeals, but everyone in the courtroom knew she would die in federal prison. The judge sentenced her to life without parole. Mrs. Mullins, he said, you used your position of authority to terrorize families based on your personal prejudices. You escalated from harassment to sabotage to attempted murder. You tried to kill a 3-month-old baby to send a message about who you believed belonged in your community. This court has no sympathy for your motivations and no mercy for your actions. As they led Karen away in shackles, she looked at me one last time. There was no defiance left in her eyes. No superiority. Just the broken stare of someone who had finally encountered consequences for her cruelty. After the trial, the FBI investigation continued into other HOA leaders who had enabled Karen's reign of terror. Officer Thompson, who had refused to investigate the attack on Emma, was arrested for conspiracy. The entire HOA board was dissolved and replaced with federal oversight. James and I decided to stay in Willow Creek. We could have moved anywhere, but this was Emma's home. This was where she had survived. This was where we had fought for justice and won. The neighborhood changed completely after Karen's arrest. Families who had been driven away began moving back. New residents included people of all backgrounds who felt safe knowing the community was no longer controlled by hatred. We turned the community garden into a memorial garden for children who had overcome medical challenges. Emma, now 2 years old and making remarkable progress, loves playing among the flowers. She still has developmental delays, but she's walking and talking and laughing every day. The months following the trial brought profound changes to both our family and our community. Emma's recovery became a daily miracle that doctors struggled to explain. The brain injury that should have left her severely disabled instead seemed to unlock an extraordinary capacity for empathy and emotional intelligence. Dr. Martinez continued to monitor Emma's progress through regular checkups, each one revealing new developments that amazed the medical team. At 18 months, Emma began using sign language to communicate before she could speak clearly. By age 2, she was walking steadily and forming complete sentences. At 3, she was reading simple books and showing remarkable problem-solving skills. I've never seen anything like it, Dr. Martinez told us during Emma's 3rd birthday checkup. The areas of her brain that were damaged have essentially rewired themselves. She's not just recovering, she's developing capabilities that exceed normal parameters. It's like her brain found better ways to process information. Emma's emotional development was even more remarkable. She seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of other people's feelings that went far beyond her years. When other children were upset, she would immediately recognize their distress and offer comfort with a wisdom that left adults speechless. Her preschool teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, documented numerous instances of Emma's extraordinary empathy. Yesterday, a new student was crying because he missed his mother, she told us. Emma walked over, sat beside him and said, "It's okay to be sad. Sometimes I get scared too, but it always gets better." Then she gave him her favorite toy to hold until he felt better. This gift for healing others became Emma's defining characteristic. Perhaps because she had experienced trauma so early and survived it, she was uniquely equipped to help others navigate their own pain. She became the child other children instinctively turned to when they needed comfort or understanding. The community transformation was equally dramatic. The new HOA board, elected under federal supervision, implemented sweeping reforms that completely changed the character of Willow Creek. They established an independent civil rights committee to review all complaints and fines. They created transparent processes for rule changes and enforcement. Most importantly, they passed strict anti-discrimination policies with real consequences for violations. Mrs. Chin, the elderly woman who had lived next to Karen and witnessed years of harassment, was elected as the new president. Her first act was to formally apologize to every family that had been targeted by Karen's regime. She held a community meeting where she addressed the systemic racism and harassment that had been allowed to flourish. "We failed you," she said to a packed auditorium. "We allowed fear and prejudice to take root in our neighborhood. We stood by while our neighbors were terrorized simply because they looked different, worshiped differently, or came from different cultures. That ends today. Willow Creek will be a place where every family feels welcome, where diversity is celebrated, and where children can grow up safely regardless of their differences." The physical changes to the neighborhood were immediate and symbolic. The gates that had enforced exclusion were removed and replaced with welcoming gardens designed by residents from different cultural backgrounds. The community center that had been used for Karen's authoritarian meetings was renovated into a multicultural space hosting ESL classes, children's programs, and cultural celebrations. Families who had been driven away by Karen's harassment began returning to Willow Creek. The Rodriguez family, who had moved after their dog was poisoned, decided to come back when they learned of the changes. The Nguyen family, who had left after repeated vandalism of their garden, purchased a larger home in the neighborhood and created a beautiful Asian-inspired landscape that became a model for other residents. New families also moved in, attracted by reports of the transformation. A Syrian refugee family found support and friendship among neighbors who helped them navigate American customs while respecting their traditions. A family with 2 autistic children discovered a community that not only accepted their differences but celebrated the unique perspectives their children brought to neighborhood life. The memorial garden we created in Emma's honor became the heart of the new Willow Creek. Located where Karen's sterile common area had once enforced conformity, the garden now bloomed with plants and flowers representing every culture in our diverse community. Children played among roses from Mexico, jasmine from India, cherry trees from Japan, and herbs used in Middle Eastern cooking. Emma, now 4 years old and thriving beyond all medical expectations, loves spending time in the memorial garden. She doesn't understand that it bears her name or represents her survival of an attempt to kill her. To her, it's simply a beautiful place where children play together, where flowers grow in harmony, and where neighbors smile at each other regardless of the language they speak or the color of their skin. The annual Emma Williams Community Day became one of the county's largest celebrations of diversity and inclusion. Families traveled from across the region to participate in activities celebrating different cultures, share food from around the world, and hear speakers discuss the importance of building welcoming communities. Emma always served as the honorary ribbon cutter, a role she performed with the same serious concentration she brought to all her activities. Last year, when she was 4, Emma gave an impromptu speech to the crowd gathered in the memorial garden. "This is where all the pretty flowers grow together," she said, her small voice clear in the morning air. "They're all different colors and shapes, but they make the garden more beautiful. That's like our neighborhood. We're all different, but we make it better when we're together." The crowd applauded her simple wisdom, but I was struck by how naturally she understood the lesson that had taken adults years of struggle to learn. Emma had grown up in a community transformed by the fight against hatred, and to her, diversity and inclusion were simply normal parts of life. Karen died in federal prison when Emma was 5 years old. I received the notification as part of the Victim Services Program, but I felt no satisfaction. She had become irrelevant to our lives, a shadow from the past that no longer had the power to hurt us. Emma doesn't know about Karen's death. She's too busy being a kindergartner, making friends, learning to read, and discovering the world with boundless curiosity. She comes home every day with stories about her classmates and art projects covered in glitter. Her best friend is Maria, whose family had been targeted by Karen years before. The 2 girls are inseparable, chattering in the mixture of English and Spanish that has become the soundtrack of our transformed neighborhood. They build fairy houses in the memorial garden and stage elaborate tea parties for their stuffed animals. Mama, Maria says her grandmother makes the best cookies in the world, Emma announced one afternoon. But I told her you make the best cookies. Can we have a cookie contest? This is the life Karen tried to steal from her. Friendship, laughter, the simple joy of childhood competition over whose grandmother makes better cookies. Every moment of Emma's happiness feels like a victory over the woman who wanted to silence her forever. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I still think about that terrible moment when I found Emma lifeless in her crib. I remember the terror, the desperation, the certainty that I was losing my child to someone's hatred. But then I think about the little girl she has become, kind, strong, joyful, and unbroken, and I know that love truly is stronger than hate. Emma will start first grade in the fall, ready to continue her journey in a neighborhood that celebrates her differences instead of trying to eliminate them. She'll grow up knowing she was worth fighting for, that her life has value, and that there are people who will move heaven and earth to protect her. Karen Mullins intended to write Emma's ending before her story had barely begun. She wanted to silence a voice that hadn't yet learned to speak. But Emma survived, thrived, and found her voice, a voice that now speaks for children everywhere who are different, struggling, or marginalized. And in the end, that's the only story that really matters. Not the story of the woman who tried to kill a baby out of hatred, but the story of the baby who refused to let anyone define her worth or limit her potential. A story about a community that chose love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, and hope over hatred. That's Emma's legacy. That's our victory. And that's the world we built together from the ashes of someone else's cruelty.